guys. I'm Meredith Arnold, and this is Samuel Phillips. And we have the honor today of hosting Dr. Ron Carter. Mr. Carter is a two-time Grammy Award winner, and with over 2,500 albums to his credit. He is by far one of the most influential and original jazz bassists of all time. He is a master musician, a composer, a conductor, a double doctorate or triple doctorate professor, and an author, and above all, a jazz icon. So will you please help me in welcoming Dr. Ron Carter. Well, welcome. Just to kind of get a feel for the whole entire thing, we'd like to start off with nearly half a century of experience and 2,500 albums. What do you think, what are your thoughts on what it takes to succeed in the music business?
Talent, discipline, stick-to-itiveness, a little bit of luck, and a healthy industry.
Are there any fundamental rules that you tend to follow before, playing or performing personally?
In preparation for going to work, or doing a concert or something like that?
Yeah.
Well, I've always tried to get to wherever the facility was, a concert or a nightclub, an hour before the start of the concert. I want to make sure my bass is still in, it's not been damaged and transport from point A to point B. I like to make sure the amplifier equipment still works, that the piano's in tune. And if it's my group, I like to sit down with them and tell them the program I've planned for the evening. And tell them that I have a story in mind for tonight's setup. I work with 3 different groups, a 9-piece group with 4 cellos, a quartet of piano, bass, drums, and percussion, and a trio of piano, bass, and drums. I try to plan the night's music during the course of the day, and I try to arrive at the concert facility or the nightclub early enough to make sure that my plan is understood by my fellow musicians of either one of those 3 groups. I've always tried to avoid getting out of my car and going right to work, right to the bandstand. Unfortunately, most jazz facilities don't have the warm-up room capacities or dressing room facilities that all concert halls have. So the jazz musician is quite a physical disadvantage in that he can't really warm up on his instrument before he goes to work. So my solution is to get there early enough so that at least I can get my head tuned in to the right music for the evening.
You have many experiences in regards to record labels, and with CTI Records, it is regarded as one of the most successful jazz labels of all times, and you appeared on most of the recordings, if I'm not mistaken. And is there a record that sticks out in your mind, and if so, why? And as well, how did your experiences from both the Blue Note record labels and CTI differ from each other?
Let me answer that question backwards. Okay. The Blue Note recordings were always rehearsed. We'd meet at a rehearsal studio and rehearse from 2 to 6 on Tuesday or Wednesday and Thursday, and record at Rudy Van Gelder's all day Friday until the recording was finished. The CTI records were always, you walk in and play the music. My rehearsal was to, on the way to the recording session, turn the radio on and see what tune was hot for the day, because that would be on the CTI label recording session for that day. I think one of the things that made the CTI label so successful was the covers. The covers were fabulous. You know, my cover's got an Indian head nickel in a container, and one of Bill Jackson's has ostrich in the sunset. Freddie Hubbard's got his own kind of cover. I think the other thing that made the label successful was that the CTL went on tour. We toured Japan twice, we played Hawaii, we toured Europe a couple of times, and we toured the States. So the people who bought these CTI records would actually see those same players in their local concert hall. I don't quite understand why the other jazz labels never followed that path. It seemed as if they were not interested in having a label that's successful. But that was the primary difference between those two labels. The first part of your question, I have had a difficult time answering, because it refers to all those records I made, and do I have a favorite one of those? And my answer is always, I've done so many of them that I would hate to think that if I say this one is my particular favorite, that those producers and guys on those other 2,500 records would call my house and bang on my door until I got their name included in that list. So that they would call me knowing how many choices they had has always pleased me.
In regards to that, well, I guess since you've had so many musical experiences as well, in terms of like awards, et cetera, would it be hard for you to say that there's one that sticks out in your mind as well? Because you have said so many in relation to the recordings?
I would probably answer the same way. Each of those records, it's like going to school for me, a class, in that they have different personalities. The recording session has different personnel. The music has its own personalities in itself. It's a different engineer. It's a different day of the week. It's a different studio. All those factors make each day, each recording session, each album, an event in itself. And I've always treated those sessions as going to school free. I mean, I've learned how to maybe talk more kindly to people. You know, I've learned how to not comment on something. And I've learned how to make the date go a different direction because of my commentary or because of my music. I've learned how certain people write music. If I plan a Benny Golson recording session, for example, I've learned how to listen to a playback so I can play my part better the next time. So for me, it's a matter of having 2,500 free lessons.
What advice would you give for kind of post-recording production, especially on your own albums and your own experience?
Well, on mine, I've been kind of lucky to be able to follow the project almost to its end. You know, it amazes me that from the time I play a note in the studio until it gets to your home, there are 4 or 5 other people who affect the sound of that note. You have the engineer, you have the editor, you have the guy who cuts the master, and the guy who prints the CDs. And they all have their view of how a bass is supposed to sound. You know? Unfortunately, I can't be there for all those processes. I can only be there for the recording and maybe the mixing. You know, so I think it's quite a feat that you're able to identify a person by their sound on so many different records that's the same sound for these different projects, given the process involved between that note at the studio and that note at your house.
So you said that all these people have a certain perspective on which the sound should be of a bass. So you are known for having a remarkable tone in terms of like longevity, et cetera, in terms of tone production. So is there any exercise in which you did before you even got into jazz to make sure that you would maintain in terms of intonation, et cetera, anything along those lines, to produce a tone that is as long and remarkable as yours is?
I would like to say yes, but you know, I kind of like the idea of not really knowing. You know, I like the magic of the mystery. You know, I think it's like when you define what jazz is, you make it sound so uncomplicated, so the person will understand the answer. that the magic, I think, is in the complexity of the music, you know. And I've been playing bass since I was 18. Yeah, that's 52 years. And I think I decided a long time ago that it's possible to take this instrument and make a sound that I could be held responsible for each time I play this note. And to that end, I made an experiment with different sound posts and different strings and different pressure between the right and left hand, and many hours of practice, you know. And I think the key, would be with not being satisfied for a sound that's almost good. You know, if it's not good, then it's not good. It's not almost, you know. It's a lot of work. And again, I'm pleased that the initial sound of the studio was enough there that they got the most of it when it got to your house.
All of the reasons that you listed and all the answers that you listed, it says that you try and weave in certain licks in your music to make a listener's ears perk up. And would you try, and when you play, would you like to make a personal connection with the listener, or is it you're more of a personal connection to the music? Because if you are looking forward to them listening and their ears perking up, then I'm not too sure.
Well, you know, let me go back to your fifth word, which is licks. I try to not have people think of what I do as that, you know. I think every jazz player has something that they can use to trigger off a whole new string of ideas. Now, I think we all have these small seeds that we have stumbled on in our career, and we're comfortable enough to draw on one of these seeds, hoping that it will throw us to a different kind of tree. And while we all have them, I think we try to kind of disguise them so that people don't say, well, here comes this particular trick again, or this particular variation on that theme. So when I do these things you refer to as riffs or licks, my intent is to make the music go from here to here. And if the audience or listener is able to catch that shift, that's okay. If they don't catch it, I don't care, as long as they get here. And I'm responsible for that.
How has classical music influenced, I guess, your entire musical experience, and especially relating to your jazz career as a bassist?
Well, I think one of the things that most jazz players took from their classical experience was how to practice. I think all the jazz players who studied classically knew they had to prepare a lesson every week with a certain number of pages and measures in a certain amount of time, 1 week, from Monday to the following Monday to do page 14 and 15 okay. And they knew that if they didn't prepare, they'd be paying the price of doing it again the next week or whatever. That discipline, I think, and learning how to practice has helped me when I have had not that amount of time to practice. You know, when I was probably younger than you, I was practicing 6-7 hours a day as a classical player because I had the time. You know, now that I've gotten 50 years older than you, and I'm pretty busy, I don't have that kind of hours left to practice. So I've learned how to use some of those practice techniques to cram a 6-hour time period into 2 hours a week and be pretty good at it. As far as the bass technical improvements, I think those improvements are coming by way of inventors of the pickups, the built-in microphones and amplifiers. And as they get better, and as the choices you have of whether you want an open-air mic attached to the side of the bass, or a pickup built into the bridge, or a pickup under the bridge, those improvements are kind of out of my hand. what I've tried to do is find the one that I found would affect the bass less given this device on the instrument. And right now I use a data gauge realist for playing concerts live, and I have a current pickup that I had built into the sound post for recordings.
How did you bring the bass out of the rhythm section and make it a lead instrument, especially with the current bands that you are the leader of?
Well, I think every bass player wants to be a band leader after a while. They get tired of taking instructions from that guy up there, you know. And when I got to that stage with some real serious thought, I thought that, hey, I can do that, you know. I mean, he doesn't know any more than I do. He doesn't know any more tunes, you know. I think what I've been a part of is to be able to give bass players another vision that they too can be a band leader. I work with 3 different size groups, actually 4. Jim Hall and I do a duo, and I have a trio with Russell Malone and Mulgrew Miller, guitar and bass respectively, and have a quartet of piano, bass, drums, percussion, and a 9-piece band. What I've tried to do for me, and if the bass players can share this, they're more than welcome to it, that you have to present a credible image as a band leader. You know, you're as responsible as those people who are other band leaders. You got to know the songs, you got to know some harmony, you got to know some theory, you have to have a talent on the bass, you have to know how to talk to people, you have to know how to say no, you know, you have to know how to write the checks. All these things are part of being a band leader. And bass players who are not experienced in doing any of these things, their path to being a leader would be a lot more difficult than mine was.
I know you just mentioned what's important to really look for in a band leader. What is important to look for in the rest of your band as a drummer, for instance?
Well, you know, one of the things I learned up to this point as of 5:30 Monday is that how the drummer tunes the drums. And I kind of insist that the drummer in my band play a piccolo snare, which is about this thick, because it's a really bright and crisp sound that's out of the range of the bass. That he retuned his bass drum so it doesn't clash with my open A and open E. And that when he plays a drum solo, it should be no louder than when he's playing with a band. I'm assuming he reads music and he understands song form. And that he doesn't become intimidated by what I play.
I was reading that you played electric bass for a short period of time in the early 60s. And I'm just curious as to why you decided to focus mainly strictly on acoustical bass, and you never went back again. Because it said you never went back. It could be wrong, so mistake me, but why don't you ever go back?
Well, you know, at the time, it was called Fender, the brand name actually at the time, came on the scene. It wasn't doing much in the commercial, or certainly none in the jazz field. And then Monk Montgomery, Wes's brother, began to play with Lionel Hampton's band and made it do what other electric bass players hadn't done other than the rock and roll bass players, you know, 1-4-5-1. When that instrument got to New York finally, the producers of commercials didn't know if they wanted the electric bass sound or the acoustic bass sound. So all the upright players in New York ran out and bought these electric basses, George Vivier, Milt Hinton, Richard Davis, me, and for a while we were running around in cabs in New York with an upright on one arm and kind of dragging the bass along like a little red wagon down the street, you know. As it turned out, to work much on that instrument, you got to really play it really well. And as the level of skill on that bass by those players got better, you know, they made the electric bass do other kinds of things. It was clear to all of us that to be that competitive, you got to stop playing the upright. Well, I felt that wasn't okay for me. So once I made the decision that I would not have the time to to be competitive with the skill level that those guys were developing on the electric bass, I just gave it to my son, and I started playing upright with a different kind of determination at that point, knowing that I'm free from this responsibility of being competitive with those players like ultimate Victor Wooten and Steve Bailey and all those, Marcus Miller and Tom Barney. They really make the bass do something, you know. I don't have that kind of time to be that competitive, so I'm comfortable just to play the upright and try to do what I can do.
Aside from being a musician, as an educator, what is the most important advice you could give students? And is there anything you feel students seeking higher degrees in education need to know or understand?
There's about 5 questions. I'm trying to answer them in my head. One of the age-old questions that we hear is that, can you teach jazz in school? Which is part of this question. And my answer to that is, yes, you can teach it, but you can't raise their talent level. You can show them the tools it takes to improvise or to voice a chord in a certain fashion when you hear this kind of beat or when they hear this rhythm, but you can't make them find their own rhythm, you know. So you can teach the skills to play jazz, but you can't teach them to play the music. What I tell the students who I see for these many years who are looking to be famous, I guess is a good word, or, you know, I tell them, you know, you can play music in a lot of fashions other than the local nightclub. You can be a teacher. You can be a repairman. You know, you can have a music store. You can be a good composer. You can be an arranger. You can be a librarian. So don't think that your career, as you study to be a jazz player, will be a failure if you don't get a chance to play with me. That's okay. Do something else that makes you necessary in my life.
What has been one of the most influential musical experiences that I guess stands out in your mind as far as performing goes? And I kind of preface this with knowledge of, in May you celebrated your 70th birthday at Carnegie Hall. What was...
70?
Oh, sorry. 69? 68?
Again, this is one of those questions where I'm kind of afraid to answer for fear that all those gigs that I played on, those guys will get mad at me. But I think a highlight, if I can just pick one, would have been playing at Carnegie Hall on June 27, which was part of the JVC annual Jazz Festival series in New York that covers 10 days and is strung out through all these venues in New York. The title of the program, again, is, for me, pretty embarrassing. It's called The Master at 70. And I had 4 groups. The first band was Russell Malone and Mulligan Miller with a trio. The second group was Jim Hall and myself. Then we had intermission. And the third group was Jack DeJohnette, Wayne Short, and Herbie Hancock. And the fourth group was my quartet of Stephen Scott, Peyton Crossley, and Rolando Morales. But I think, in addition to knowing that those 8 musicians would stop their busy schedule to do this for me, to do this with me, almost in spite of me, you know, and it's a feeling that I can't really tell you other than it was fabulous. But the highlight of that was when I walked out on the stage with no bass, everybody stood up and applauded for like 12 minutes. It's fabulous.
Playing with Miles, were there rehearsals, or did you, was it pretty much inspiration by presence, or did he give you much directions? Or the band, not just you?
That was 6 questions. I just picked one out of the 6. When I joined Miles, it was originally a sextet. Harold Merriman on piano, Jimmy Cobb on drums, Miles, Harold Merriman on piano, Frank Strozier played alto saxophone, and George Coleman on tenor for this 6-week West Coast tour. And we had 1 rehearsal for that group. And then when that 6-week tour was over and we did the first half of Seven Steps to Heaven out in Los Angeles, we came back to New York, and Herbie Hancock was playing piano, and Tony Williams was playing drums, and Frank Strozier, and of course Harold Mabin were no longer with the band. We rehearsed 2 hours at Miles' house then, April of '63, or May of '63 or so. And next was probably July of '67. And that was it. We had 2 rehearsals during my time with the band. Miles never suggested to me or made recommendations to me on what note to play or where they were on the bass to play them. He trusted that if it was a wrong note, I would find it before he would, and I'd fix it before he could tell me. He would tell us in general that the rehearsals start on the bandstand, and we would find out what to play during the course of our live rehearsal with a live audience.
On the album you just made with Bill Frisell and Paul Motion, how did you approach playing on that? Because it's a pretty unique album.
You know, one of my loves of Bill Frisell is how he plays with no meter, but with some meter at the same time. He just kind of floats around the beat sometimes, you know. And Paul Motion, who plays drums, does that very well. I like when they do that, you know. But I explained to them, the day was like 11 o'clock, 11 to 3, something like that. And we all met there at 10:45 a.m. So I told Paul and I told Bill, starting at 11 o'clock, don't play any clouds, you know. Don't play any smoke, don't play any steam. Let's just play some good old-fashioned time. We had no rehearsals, and we recorded in a couple of hours in 2 days. I think it's a pretty nice record. We're working in New York at the Blue Note, December 9 through 14, by the way. Yeah.
In your first answer, what it takes for a musician to survive in the industry now, you said it takes a healthy industry. What do you mean by a healthy industry, and is the industry right now healthy?
The industry is not healthy right now. It's not healthy in terms of media exposure, either radio, TV, and newspapers. It's not healthy exposure in the movies. It's not healthy exposure in the terms of getting this music to people in the 3rd and 4th grades. It's not healthy because of the internet and the iPod and all the free music services that there are. It's not healthy because those services have caused record stores to close. Then, the industry was full of radio stations, for example. I mean, in New York, there were 3 stations who played jazz all the time. The station in Chicago just closed. It was a lifelong jazz station. The club in Chicago just closed. It's been floating around in Chicago for 25 years. The industry now is not as healthy as it was when I came up. When I was playing in the 60s, there were 20 jazz labels. 20. Now there's 1. Maybe 2 with Blue Note. There's Milestone with Sonny Rollins, who now is doing his own label. And the Blue Note that has me and Terrence and Wenton. But the others don't exist anymore. So that's what I mean by a healthy and non-healthy jazz environment. Despite that lack of health in the industry, players are determined to play it some kind of way, and there's an audience who's willing to try to listen to it. And I get amazed each summer when these festivals in the Caribbean especially have these jazz festivals, and the only jazz band on there is in their dressing room. I mean, you go to these festivals, you see Gladys Knight, and you see the OJs and all these bands, man, and we wonder why jazz has got a strange sound to it, or people don't know what to identify with as the promoters. feel comfortable enough to use the name jazz in these clearly non-jazz festivals, and that doesn't help me get work.
For always being such a figure that focused in jazz, how did you get involved with Tribe Called Quest for the collaboration you did with them?
Well, the guy, Q-Tip, who's the band leader, who called me one day, and he said, "Mr. Carter," I said, "Yes." "This is Q-Tip." I said, "Okay." He said, "I have a band called Tribe Called Quest." I said, "Yeah." And he said, "And we're putting a record together next month, and I'd like you to be on this record with us, you know." I said, "Well, let me call you back." So I called my son, who was into that genre of music. I said, "Hey, Miles, I just got this call from this guy named Q-Tip. You know him?" He said, "Yeah." I said, "Well, what about him?" He told me. I said, "Really?" He said, "Yeah, and?" "Oh, okay." So I called him back. I said, "Q-Tip, this is Ron Carter, and I'm returning your call. My son tells me that you're the kind of musician in the band who thinks more musically than the other groups at that time. And he said that if he asks again, I should take the job. So if it's still available, we can talk about my terms." He said, "What are they?" I said, "Well, the language you use has to be the kind that I would approve of. And it's not what I want to hear. I will be under that exit sign before you can breathe. If there are any drugs, I don't do that. If anybody's juicing, I don't do that, you know." "Oh yeah, it's okay, man." I said, "Well, you know, do you want to hear this? Do you want to hear the music before we get there?" I said, No, surprise me. You know, I don't want to know what they are. I trust that they're musical, or you wouldn't call me to do this project with you. I do have those restrictions on you, and I can assure you that I don't mind leaving, you know, in a heartbeat. So, get to the studio, and rather than be in the studio, I'm in the control room, plugged into the control board in the studio, in the panel. And they're out there in the control room. So I'm in the recording room. So I'm in the control room wearing earphones, and they're out there in the studio doing the lyrics. And so I said, "Well, why don't you just read them down so I know what kind of tempo you have and what kind of if they rhyme. I don't know if they rhyme or not, man. You know." So I said, "Okay." So he went in there, we read it. So we did that was a run through. So we were there for about an hour and a half. And we did 3 or 4 versions of the tracks that they had. And I went home. And who would have thought it? People think that's the similar record of the 90s.
I have a quick question. What are you hoping, sorry, what are you hoping to accomplish with the Monk Institute while you're here? I know that you have a masterclass on Friday.
Well, you know, what I hope to do is to have these young people understand how serious I treat this music. And I hope that for the 5 days that they're under my thumb, that they'll become as serious and understanding of what it takes as I have been for all these many years. I'll try to show them things to hopefully help them be a better musician, things to show them some humanity of the music, you know, maybe help dispel some of the concepts they've heard of musicians. You know, we've gotten a terrible reputation through the years that's untrue and undeserved. And maybe if I spend enough time with them, I can be the first person they've had this kind of contact with who does not match the images portrayed by the newspapers and the magazines and the media, you know. Hopefully we'll even do things that have nothing to do with music, you know, so that their focus is not so myopic, you know, so it's more like this, that the more they can take in this vision, the more life experiences they can bring to this music, the more stories they can tell. And we'll see if they can handle it.
I'm sorry, sir. This might seem like a little silly question, but for someone who's had such life experiences, what does jazz really mean to you?
You know, I'm not sure if your preface to your question was because you weren't sure I would be put off by it, or embarrassed by it, or that you were embarrassed to ask it. Neither one of those should have been true, okay? What jazz has offered me are the following things. A chance to be able to see if I can play what I hear in my ear on my instrument. A chance to meet some very, very great players. A chance to make some really long-lasting friendships. A chance maybe to affect the musical outlook of people who I will never meet. A chance to have my grandsons be able to find a book in the dust in the library and find my picture somewhere in the jazz book. So they'll know what their grandfather did at that time. It's given me a chance to musically thumb my nose at an industry that didn't feel I was a valuable member of their community. And the chance to sit here and have you ask me that question. All those.
You kind of hinted at earlier that technique is just a small part of music. With all the people that you've met and have interacted with, is there anything that anyone has said to you regarding the philosophy of music that's really changed the way you thought about it?
No. What has happened is I've played with enough people with different concepts. You know, Stanley Turrentine doesn't play like Sonny Rollins, who doesn't play like Joe Henderson, who doesn't play like Hank Mobley, who doesn't play like Wayne Shorter. That's 5 concepts right there. And my happening to be a part of their world has allowed me to be a part of their concepts for however long I could stand it. You know, they all have their own statements, and my job is to find what paragraph of their statements I want to make part of my system.
Mr. Carter, I feel today in the music world, in jazz and many genres, an artist will put out an album, good album to some moderate success, and then for the next 10 years just try to recreate that same album over and over again. You and your colleagues did not do that. You took jazz, you stayed true to the form, but you pushed it to a whole new level, a whole new direction, kept on reinventing yourselves. How, as an artist, were you able to do that for so many years and give us so much amazing music that spanned numerous styles of jazz, but stayed true to the art form the whole time?
I think that's part of the magic I talked about not wanting to know the answer to. I think one short answer would be that I feel that Miles Band, for example, you're probably alluding to, was like a laboratory. And every night we would come to this lab, and Miles would pass out the white jackets, and we'd look around and see these chemicals spread on the wall. He would tell us, okay, now you have 3 sets of these chemicals to make something that's going to be worthwhile. And that's kind of what we did. My job as a bass player, I think, is to be the guy who helps make the chemicals blend when they are really supposed to. It's a great environment to be in, and I've been happy to be a part of so many environments that had the same mindset. And I'm pleased to say that those environments trusted my judgment when I thought it was time to put these chemicals in the same beaker and heat them up.
And we'd like to thank you again, Mr. Carter.